All right, welcome everybody for another episode of A Cork in the Road, live with people who are shaping the Southeast wine industry. And today I'm super pumped. I have one of the coolest people I've met in North Georgia. His name is Tyler Barnes. He's the co-founder, co-owner, tasting room manager of Cellars. It's a farm winery up in Dahlonega, Georgia, and they are sourcing some grapes from California, Georgia, Texas, and they're really crafting some super special wines for the Southeast market. Welcome, Tyler.
Thank you for having me.
So have you always been working in wine? How did you find this career path in North Georgia?
Well, it's sort of, dare I say, serendipitous in certain regards. My brother-in-law, he has a formal education in winemaking. He got his degree, I think he graduated in 2009 from North Melbourne University in Australia, which is where he's originally from. And while he was in school, he met my sister, and both of us are born and raised in Lawrenceville, Georgia. He actually, whenever he graduated, he had a job offer in Niagara, but up in Canada. But my sister's like, I'm not moving to Canada. so he was decided to try to make it work in North Georgia then. And he got a job up here as a tasting room manager, and then he ended up becoming the head winemaker at Montaluce, which is about 15 minutes up the road from me, also here in Lumpkin County. Basically, I'd graduated college, 7-8 months before that, and I was working a few food service jobs that I didn't particularly care for as I was trying to work out my next move. And he ended up offering me a job to basically come on as his assistant winemaker. And for some earthly reason, I took it, having never bought a bottle of wine in my life. I was really into craft beer. So, I definitely appreciated nuance of flavor. So it was not even a hop and a skip to really kind of jumping into appreciating the nuance of wine as well. But yeah, it's just sort of fell into it. I definitely didn't plan on it. He's a bit of a different story. Yeah, he's a romantic. He fell in love with wine quite a while ago.
But you jumped on at the right time, it sounds like, which is perfect. What better late than never? Yeah,
well, and especially at this time in Dahlonega, it's the market is really getting close to kind of a critical mass point. There's 8.8 million people in the metro Atlanta area, which is where the vast majority of our customer base comes from. And, we're getting to that point where a lot of people are not only aware of North Georgia wines existing and just being a fun day trip, but there's also some very respectable wine being produced up here. And, they're starting to spread the word, and it starts building on itself. Really through no real fault of anyone, everyone's been seeing increases in revenue year on end for solidly the last 5 or 6 years in particular. So I definitely happened to fall into this industry at just the right moment.
So what makes North Georgia so good for grapes? I've seen the growth here as someone who lives in Atlanta and going up the past couple of years in North Georgia. The growth is just exponential. But what makes North Georgia around Dahlonega so good for growing grapes?
Well, honestly, a big part of why Dahlonega does have a lot to do simply with its proximity to Atlanta. Whenever you're talking about having economic opportunity for a particular business venture, you need customers that can make it up in regular numbers and relatively easily. You don't want it to be too close to the city because people still need to feel like they're getting out. But you don't want to be too far away that they necessarily have to stay somewhere overnight in the area to come see you, which some of the places further north in Georgia are certainly like that. But Dahlonega is definitely the tip of the spear as far as day trips. Certainly soil, and we just got that AVA designation for the Dahlonega Plateau. That doesn't really directly influence my business since we don't have a vineyard where we focus on growing our own fruit within said plateau. That's certainly a big deal for a lot of the other vineyards in the area. The TTB, the Tax and Trade Bureau, the federal organization that basically analyzes applications and then hands down AVA designations, they certainly concur that there is some sort of unique characteristic to the terroir, be it the soil, the climate, the vineyard practices and things of the Dahlonega area. It's a number of factors, and Dahlonega already been a tourism town for a while. Part of it'd be a good question for the owners of Three Sisters, because they're one of the oldest wineries in North Georgia. They were one of the first farm wineries when they created the license back in the early 90s. they picked Dahlonega. I believe it's because the Pauls were from the area. But then you have the Kreitzers over at Frogtown, and then the Bogners not long after them. And then, Cavender Creek, Blackstock, which is now Kai. I mean, a lot of these places, they just started popping up in really close proximity. And before you know it, you had this destination where people could come up and not go to just one winery, but they could go to multiple. It could truly be a multi-day thing or multiple trips in a year, and you're still not going to see everything. So there's people want to drink wine and look at the mountains, and if you try hard enough, you can grow fruiting plants.
It's really cool to hear you talk about the people that were kind of the original pioneers for creating that destination, that community of wineries up in North Georgia, so people can go up there and not just go to one, because they're not just going to want to go to one winery. What sets you apart then at Accent Cellars? Why are you sourcing grapes from other places, and what types of wines do you have that are a little bit different than your neighbors?
Well, I mean, first of all, why we didn't try to have a vineyard is because vineyards are obscenely expensive. It's what makes this largely a rich person's game. There's an adage in the industry: if you want to make $1 million, you have to start with 10. And there are definitely a number of wineries in North Georgia where they did start with that and more. And you see that's a particularly prevalent out in California. You go to Napa Valley, there's a lot of Silicon Valley seed money going into that. But either way, rather than my brother-in-law try to locate someone with that capital and partner with them, we wanted our own business. And our focus, or really our passion, has always been on the winemaking side. Because the winery and the vineyard, although inextricably linked by the ultimate product and all that, I mean, great wine starts in the vineyard, no question. But even if you have someone that does both sides of that in terms of production, I guarantee you they have a preference, and our preference is definitely heavily weighted towards the winery side. So we first and foremost identify ourselves as winemakers. So we sort of geared our business in that direction by buying wholesale fruit from markets that are large enough to actually supply wholesale fruit, because there are vineyards in every single state. That doesn't mean they grow enough fruit to meet the demands of even their market. So you got states like California, Texas, Washington. These places are able to grow enough fruit on an economical scale that they can, have enough to supply their own winemaking needs, but also wholesale fruit to other winemakers around the country. So we've really just sort of we've taken that, and my brother-in-law had a lot of contacts from internships and things that he did out in California while he was getting his degree. So we already knew a number of brokers and things that could get us good prices on really good fruit. So that was basically where we just sort of started. It was sort of a no-brainer for us. We knew that having a vineyard would take too long, and I'm a mildly impatient person. My brother-in-law's a very impatient. So he definitely wasn't going to wait the better part of a decade to get Accent Cellars off the ground. That basically is why we've gone mainly with buying our fruit. But then as far as what sets us apart, outside of the fact that we, very open about that, whenever people come to Accent, the place is definitely a reflection of our personalities. And I suppose the tasting room, especially mine, because I'm the one that's here pretty much all the time. But I love knowledge. And the thing about wine is that it is an abyss, and you can venture as deep into it or not as you please. And I find that even those that have plunged pretty deep, there's always more to learn. And honestly, I think that's part of what cultivated my passion early on whenever I fell into winemaking, was the complexity of it, beyond just nuances and flavor, but just all the different knobs you can tweak during the production process, between, yeast strains to different additions that you can make to, the different types of barrels, be it American, French, Hungarian, medium toast, medium plus, 24-month toast, 36-month toast. There's just all of these different things that ultimately dial in the particular flavor profile of something. Clearly, it kind of gets me going. I love that part of it. I consider that kind of the trenches of winemaking. But whenever people come in here, I always aim for them to leave having learned something that they didn't know before. And sometimes it's as simple as, why do you swirl wine, or what a tannin is, or getting into the intricacies of malolactic fermentation, whatever it is, there's always somewhere where we can kind of expand our understanding of wines. And, we also do that with the styles of wines that we make. We like different, so one of my favorites on our list right now, the Albariño, is a Spanish white varietal. And I know there's one other vineyard in North Georgia that grows it. I'm not sure how successfully. I've actually never tried it. So picking varietals that are maybe not as common, just doing them in styles that are not all that common, like our Sauv Blanc done in more of an Australian style, as opposed to a California or New Zealand style, which most people are familiar with.
I can tell just by the way you talk about your wines that it really is that winemaking side that you have this excitement for, because you talk about the flavors, you talk about the styles and the depth and the complexity of your wines in a way that you really did have your hands on those choices. And I always talk about wine of being this beautiful combination of science, nature, and art. And I really noticed when I was in your tasting room that Accent Cellars focuses on educating people about that art side. There are other places you can go where you might focus on the farming. You might see other places where it's the production, but I could really tell that it was this artistic, stylistic choices in your wines that really set it apart, at least as a visitor. I also noticed that you were running around the tasting room like a champion, and you create the energy in your tasting room. So I highly recommend people go bring a picnic, play some games in the tasting room. It's super fun with you there. And what's your favorite part of your job? What's your current role as tasting room manager? You're involved in the wine, but what's your favorite part of this job? I'm a people person. It's like my dad always told me growing up. You got the gift of gab, boy. I never meet a stranger, so I really enjoy meeting different people. And honestly, I've always loved the challenge of articulation and trying to find the right words to say things. And obviously, wine tasting lends itself to that challenge quite frequently. But even beyond just tasting notes for the wines, I mean, the dynamics of conversing with people, especially ones you've never met before, it's very interesting. And when people come in, you're paying me to talk, which I love a captive audience. But whenever they come in, like they want to know my story, they want to know what I have to say. I feed on that energy. I mean, basically, it's the opposite of people that get kind of social anxiety when they're around large groups. I'm kind of the other way around. I've always kind of had an easy confidence, and I guess it is just that the sort of intuitive, natural feeling I get from that draws me into it. I mean, I'm essentially having the same conversation 500-600 times a month. What keeps me able to continue to have that conversation is, I suppose, belief in the integrity of, you as the customer, anyone that comes in as a customer. I owe it to them, that's again, kind of what you're paying for. That's what you're maybe not necessarily expecting, but that's certainly what I expect for myself. I want everyone to come in here and feel excited about wine. And more importantly than maybe excitement is comfort. I've always been just sort of that grounding type of person that I like it when people feel comfortable, and it's not knowing something shouldn't make you feel shame. If anything, it should breed excitement of like, oh, well, let's find out, that's one of the beauties of living in the time that we do is just, oh, well, let's Google it. Like we don't know the answer. So I really love elucidating things to people that maybe they never really thought about needing a little bit of light shined on them, such as why you swirl wine, and then people like that like, oh, I never knew that. That's awesome. That's probably that's my favorite part, is just having people just be like, wow, well, I didn't even realize. I thought people were just being pretentious. I'm like, no, there's very practical reasoning behind a lot of the things that you do in wine. But yeah, it's I would say the teaching aspect. I suppose I'm sort of a natural educator in that regard. So I have to ask you, as someone who does love being in the tasting room and that opportunity to educate someone or bring a new piece of information to their life about wine that they didn't know, how often are you getting people here in North Georgia that it is their first winery visit? Do people tell you, like, I've never been to a tasting room before? How often does that happen to you?
It's not super common, but it does happen. Usually it's just one or two people within a group of 4 or 5, which kind of relates back to a point I was making earlier about the critical mass point of North Georgia. You're getting friends that are dragging other friends that would have never considered going to a winery. Like, come on, let's go do something on a Saturday. Let's get away from the hustle and bustle of the city or suburbia or whatever. So yeah, you do get some people that come through and it's their first time, and it kind of runs the gamut as far as how self-effacing they are of their ignorance of wine. Some are like, I don't know anything, and it doesn't bother me. What's up? Other people are like, yeah, I know nothing about wine, thinking that like they're going to do a bad job at tasting. And, so like kind of coming back to one of my values that I have just as in general as a person, but certainly translates into the energy that I bring to the tasting room is, making people feel comfortable. People will say all the time, like, this might be a stupid question. And I almost just want to shake them like, there are no stupid questions. Like, you're not expected to know this. I'm supposed to be the expert in the room. So it's fine. Anything you got, just lay it on me. I can't even think of a question too stupid that I would be like, really? That's what you're going to ask? So you see that trepidation a little bit, but I like, for me personally, I get really excited whenever they're like, I don't know anything, never done tasting. It's called a flight. That's weird. I didn't know that, like I get really excited in those moments, especially if I'm not super busy and I can give them a lot of undivided attention, because then I can just go really hard into the paint. Okay. All right. Here are the basics. Here's the main axiom of flavor in wine, from earthiness on down to fruitiness. People tend to congregate at one end or the other. Whenever you're tasting wine, these are the basic steps. You want to swirl it, smell it, fill your lungs, then take a sip, swish it around your mouth, let it touch every corner of your palate, and like perhaps I get even more animated in those sorts of situations whenever you get a willing person who's like, I don't know anything, teach me. That's kind of fun. There's sort of a blank canvas there, but also with great power comes great responsibility. Any given phrase you say to them could turn into the bedrock of their understanding of wine, and they might misinterpret it, or I maybe don't know what I'm talking about on a certain point. I mean, I've certainly done tastings with people that were professionals and been doing it a long time, and they said something that I was just like, I don't think that's right. There's room for debate on a lot of things that some people think are just dogma within wine. I don't know, like even appropriate usage of dry. I like in my mind, that's pardon the pun, cut and dry. In terms of definition. I mean, I don't know. Some people still like to use dry for tannic. I'm like, let's not confuse the issue. Dry only relates to sugar, but that's neither here nor there.
And it's interesting that you have these conversations with people, because I think it's important to remember that as much as there is to know about wine, there's always something more to know. And I will never know what a wine tastes like to my friend or my mom or my husband. Like I never know what wine tastes like to guests. When I was in a tasting room, I had the same type of thing of, they wanted me to explain what they were tasting, and I can tell them all about the wine, but I don't know what you're actually tasting. And I think that you approach the education side with an open mind. And I sense that from the first time I met you. And I really think that's a great, approachable, welcoming atmosphere to bring to your tasting room. So I say, keep that going. Welcome people with all their questions and their tasting notes. Personally, I think that's great. So you said that's your favorite part of your job. And obviously it's not all sunny all the time, and it's hard work. It is very hard work, making wine, selling wine, working in a tasting room on your feet. So of all the things that you do, what would you say is the most challenging?
Well, sometimes it's just a matter of trying to get everything done that I need to get done while also being available to do tastings during the day. Like emails and especially in the growing season, whenever I do all the landscaping for our property, which I maintain about 2 to 3 acres of it weekly, which is a lot of weeding and a lot of mowing and just manicuring. So I would say like just I suppose it's a bit broad, but the hardest part of my job is maintaining the consistent manicured look that is a proper reflection of our business, from how the grass looks to inside the tasting room, cleaning it appropriately, like doing touch-up paint. Like literally once this interview is over today, I'm going to get out a little mini roller and walk around the tasting room and roll all the blemishes off of the walls, making sure the bathrooms are as spotless as I can get them. It's maintaining that accent standard, if you will. I'd say that's probably the most challenging, just because like with anything, and wine itself is even sort of an artistic reflection of it. But entropy comes for all. Everything's always moving towards disorder, and so much of our lives is dedicated to trying to keep that disorder back up into a coherent structure. So it's sort of a general most hardest thing, but I would say, it's just not overlooking the minutia of the little things that synergistically come together to help create the accent experience, in lieu of focusing also on the big picture of thinking like, well, what wines do we want for this year? Like what direction should we try to move in terms of even staffing, or, do we want to do more blends? I don't know. Try to keep every ball that's on the court mostly in play. I suppose perhaps a better metaphor, sometimes you feel like you're spinning plates. But yeah.
So you mean that you don't just drink wine with everyone that comes into the tasting room, Tyler? I'm kind of surprised to hear you do all these things. I mean, really. No, I think it's important to remember that working in the wine industry is not all glamorous. We're not always sipping wine all the time. There's a lot of there's a lot of customer service that goes into that. And I think about my experience in the industry, working with other people at nearby wineries was really important to me. And I know you've mentioned some of the other people that are in your area and Dahlonega as a whole. So what is that community like up there? How often do you get together with other people from other wineries? Are you sharing knowledge among your peers?
It sort of depends. I mean, I suppose it's like a lot of industries. Some people are friends. Some people can't stand someone else. Sometimes that animosity could go back to some perceived slight, real or fake that over 10 years ago. There's certainly some people are more stubborn minded than others about what they think the North Georgia wine industry is, what direction they think it's going, and how we should thusly respond to that. There is a statewide organization called the GWP, Georgia Wine Producers, which was formed only about 4 years ago. And basically it is a unified body of every winery in the state is free to join. And it's a unified body that basically we created sort of at the insistence of the state legislature. They're like, look, if you want to come and talk to us and lobby to us about the wine industry in Georgia, y'all can't be showing up with 3 or 4 different organizations. Y'all need to have just one organization. So that was whenever they formed the GWP. So I'd say that definitely is the sort of largest congregation of wineries, winemakers, vineyard managers, all of that we have in the state. And actually, they just met 2 weeks ago in Athens, I believe it was. Yeah. So, it just sort of depends. And there is definitely some knowledge sharing. I think a lot of wineries, there's still there's different niches within the market in terms of price point, in terms of style. Some places focus more on sweeter wines and a lot of muscadine driven winemaking versus, other places like, our former employer, Monteluce, with exclusively vinifera, and they have a couple of North American hybrids as well. Yeah. So there are different styles, which, someone that makes a lot of sweet wine may not have as much to offer someone that makes a lot of deep, dark, rich, well-oaked red. There's obviously room for both. I'm certainly not speaking to the legitimacy of one over the other. Yeah, another thing whenever it comes to sharing information, there are varying levels of skill. 99.9% of the winemakers in North Georgia are self-taught. I know of only about 4 people that have a formal education in enology or viticulture. There are probably a few people that have viticulture degrees, the vineyard side of things. Yeah, so you see more knowledge sharing on the vineyard side of things, which one could argue is the more important area for a young wine region to be sharing notes on, comparing notes on. And actually, as it kind of relates back to the GWP, once we got it formed several years ago, that was whenever we were finally able to successfully lobby the state legislature to appropriate funds to the University of Georgia to hire a viticulturalist, a full-time viticulturalist. And his name is Kane Hickey. Great guy. Really, really love Kane. But he's the first viticulturalist to show up in, UGA's and R1 universities. So to be a professor there, you have to be doing active research, contributing or actively to the body of knowledge. So he's doing Georgia specific viticultural research, which we've lacked. It's been a lot of people just kind of doing their own trial and error And, especially whenever you're more self-taught, there's a lot of false pattern recognition of like, oh, well, that probably happened because of this. And it's like, actually, if you knew about, factor XYZ, it was actually this particular disease vector that led to that issue. And this is how you address it, not just kind of throwing your hands and be like, I don't know, we'll use more herbicide and try to keep the grass down in between the rows more next year. And really it was just a way of something that you could do to tweak your spray schedule or something like that. We're definitely, I would say that's another big factor that's changing in Georgia, mainly in North Georgia, but that's also where I have all of my experience really is the vineyard side, and just the amount of knowledge that's come in over the last, 5-10 years, be it a pruning practices or spray schedules, things like that. And then there's another bottleneck of it sort of helps to further highlight how small and intimate this industry really is, even though there's I think 55, maybe 60 wineries in North Georgia. I think there's 75 in all of Georgia. But there's a man named Fritz Westover who's a vineyard consultant. And prior to Kane Hickey, he was kind of the only expert that we really had coming through to help train people better on how to manage their vineyards. There are a number of vines that they chose at Fritz's recommendation. There's even kind of a running joke amongst many of his winery owners of the Westover effect or the Fritz effect. Like a lot of his little like mannerisms and ways of explaining how to determine do you keep this cane or choose that one whenever it comes to your pruning decisions. Like we all use kind of his verbiage in it. But he is a wonderful asset who's done a lot of consulting really up and down the East Coast, but he has a number of clients here in Georgia. And he has definitely been not only a good friend, he's a great guy, but he's very, very knowledgeable. And I think he's had a lot to do with it. So like I said, the vineyard is definitely, that's the side we share knowledge on the most. And that is definitely, that will always be the biggest challenge to 100% Georgia wines, is figuring out what is the best way to grow fruit in Georgia and overcome the various challenges we have, which are invariably going to end up centering on our level of precipitation, because water equals disease pressure. Pruning practices and spray schedules and what's the appropriate amount of labor to have in your vineyard at a given time of year. And
that's huge though, Tyler. That's huge, because the vineyard is producing the fruit. And obviously if you're in a region like North Georgia, where people are sharing that knowledge and you have the consultant and you have this growing body of what grows well here, you have a little bit more hands-on control because you're nearby. But I know that you also source your fruit. So how do you get that type of level of knowledge in areas that you're choosing to buy fruit from? I know you're sourcing from California, from Texas. What are your quality standards in relation to what you just described here in Georgia of what's happening? How do you decide quality of the fruit that you're buying?
Well, ideally, whenever you are buying fruit from across the country, you fly out to said locale, say California, and say early August, and you go and you walk the vineyards from the actual farms you're going to be buying from. If they haven't already been claimed, you can even pick which rows of fruit you want, which is definitely nice. So, you'll talk to the vineyard manager. You'll kind of get a feel for what their depth of understanding is. I like what's their philosophy on grape growing and stuff. Like that's the ideal situation, is whenever you can get out there, you can touch the soil, you can touch the clusters, and you can really just get a feel for how they treat their fruit. Because a lot can be determined just by looking at the vine itself and what kind of shape it's in. If you come in and you got really good spacing, you have 12 to 15 shoots per linear foot of cordon and they've done their leaf plucking properly. I mean, you can tell whenever there's real knowledge and wisdom and care going into vineyard management. And definitely when there isn't, and when there isn't, it's usually due to a function of just ignorance. They don't really realize we shouldn't be cutting them like that. But it's not always an option to be able to go out to the farm itself. So like in almost any business, it's about relationships. We've cultivated relationships with a number of wine grape brokers where basically they have relationships with, 40 or 50 or 100 different growers. And then they have their own specific standards that, we're familiar with. And they coordinate getting us the fruit from these farmers, and that passes through their facility first. And if it doesn't, cut the mustard for them, then they don't ship it to us. We focus on trying to find small time brokers. Like one of our favorites is North Coast wine grape brokers. Rick and Shannon, it's his husband and wife. They've been doing it about, I think, the better part of 20 years now. But they're out of Lake County. They're good people. They have integrity. They've always done right by us. We've worked with them for years. And whenever they say they got some quality Riesling out of Mendocino, we're like, okay, then we'd love to work with some Riesling. We'll take 2 ton. And it shows up, and it's exactly what we were looking for, and we're able to make the wine that we're trying to make. Then we're happy. So sometimes the decision on where to buy fruit is as simple as like, well, it's available, let's go for it.
And the people it sounds like it still is a relationship building process, even on the fruit buying side of things. Mm-hmm. And guess my question for you, because you are always learning as well. You have lots of facets of your business. So how are you continuing your own wine education? How often do you go out and taste? How often do you go explore nearby wineries?
Nearby wineries, not as often as I'd like, but I usually only have one day off a week, and either I have other errands to do or I just really feel like being lazy. Then the rest of the time, obviously, if they're open, I'm open. And even if they're not open, I'm open, because we're open every day of the week. There are some places that close for certainly during the slow season during the week. But I don't go to the other wineries in the area terribly often. But the way I continue my education is I go down Wikipedia rabbit holes. Sometimes I'll just pick a random varietal I don't know much about. I'll click on its Wikipedia page, and then I'll look up from my computer an hour and a half later, and I'm like suddenly looking at the Wikipedia page for like alkaline earth metals or something, just because I keep clicking other links. I'm like, what's that? Because I do love the science side of things. So whenever it starts getting really technical, that's whenever I really start pulling the threads. Then there's a service called VineBox, which is another method I've done for exposing my palate to wines that I'm not terribly familiar with. And it's an online service where basically you pay, I think it's like $175 for half a year or something like that. They send out quarterly boxes, so you get 4 per year, and each box comes with 9 tubes that have around 300 milliliters of wine in each of them. Vast majority are Italy and France, which I'm fine with, because actually before I got the VineBox, I really hadn't had too much European wine. I'd mostly only had American wine. So that's been a lot of fun of just kind of looking at the differences there. And certainly European styles are quite distinctive from American styles in more ways than one. There's a really great little wine shop in town that carries wines from all over the world, and for very, very good prices. I got a really, really killer Sauvignon Blanc, but it was like $16-17, and it was outstanding. Just beautiful acid profile. So that's another thing. I go out, and when I have time, I splurge on a nice bottle of wine. I'll order bottles online from different retailers and stuff, I try not to pay too much attention to the point system, which I think some people are getting a little overly wrapped up in these days. I mean, it's not like it doesn't mean anything, but what's 99 points to you might be an 89 to me. And that's fine. There doesn't have to be this bedrock of objectivity behind scoring wines. I mean, I understand the practicality of it. That's certainly more to go on criteria wise than, this one's got a cool label, which sometimes that's all you got to go on. It's like, wow, that's really good branding. Maybe the wine's good too.
But you're always out there searching for something new. And it seems like you have this enthusiasm for always trying new things. And so I want to be sure, before we wrap up today, how can people find more about Accent Cellars? Where are you located, and where can people get your wines?
Yeah. So, as you stated earlier, we are located in Dahlonega, Georgia. We're actually just within the city limits. We're 2 minutes from the historic downtown area. So if you ever find yourself passing through Dahlonega, and you're in the square, know that you are not even a hop and a skip away from Accent Cellars. And actually, drive time wise, we're one of the closest to Atlanta, especially if you're in the 85-400 corridors. Our wines currently, I have a wholesale license. I don't use it terribly prolifically. So there's only a couple of outlets, mainly around Lumpkin County, that carry them. At the current moment, I just don't have enough wine to be able to justify that. So you really want Accent wines, you got to come to Accent Cellars.
You mean we have to come and bring a picnic and play games and have fun at the tasting room to get your wines? That sounds perfect.
It's a lot to ask, I know.
It's perfect. And then are you on Instagram as well?
Yeah, Instagram, Facebook. Luckily, Accent Cellars is the name was wide open. So on any platform, we are Accent Cellars.
That's easy. And that also keeps people up to date on any special events or winemaker dinners and things like that. I really hope everybody gets a chance to drink wine with you in the tasting room, Tyler. You are awesome. I really appreciate what you're doing for North Georgia. So everybody go check out Accent Cellars next time you're up north. Thanks for your time today, Tyler.
Hey, it's been a pleasure, Kelly. Thank you for having me.